Can you imagine an HOA tyrant charging $400 to let a cancer nurse save a dying man's life? That's the nightmare my uncle faced, and I wasn't about to let it slide. My phone jolted me awake at dawn, buzzing like a hornet on my nightstand. It was Uncle Henry, his voice thin and shaky, not his usual steady tone. He said his nurse, Sarah, got stopped at the neighborhood gate. Stage 3 lymphoma was eating him alive, and he needed her to adjust his chemo meds, check his VY tall stuff that couldn't wait. Some HOA bigshot had decided she wasn't allowed in. My blood started simmering. Uncle Henry was why I became a lawyer, and no petty gatekeeper was gonna mess with his Sir VY Val. I told him I'd be there in 10, already halfway out of bed. I'm a federal prosecutor, used to chasing down mob bosses and corporate crooks, not HOA drama. But family's family, and this felt personal. Driving into Willow Creek Estates, the place looked like a suburban dream, perfect lawns, gleaming fountains, houses lined up like soldiers. The gates loomed tall, manned by 2 guards who only let me through after seeing my ID on Henry's VY cider list, not because I flashed my badge. Inside, Henry greeted me, pale as a ghost, eyes sunken from chemo. He said Sarah was still stuck at the gate because the guard was enforcing some new rule. Healthcare workers needed a form filed 72 hours in advance. For routine stuff, maybe that's fine, but cancer doesn't send a calendar in VYT. I told him to rest. I'd fix this. At the gate, the guard recognized me from earlier, mumbling he was just following orders from a woman named Linda, the HOA's new VYC president. Sarah sat in her car nearby, medical bag in hand, looking stressed but patient. I introduced myself, and she showed me her gear: chemo drugs, syringes, VY towels, monitors. Nothing that'd disturb the neighborhood's precious peace. I asked the guard to call Linda. He hesitated, said she was strict, but dialed her up. Her voice crackled through, sharp and smug, introducing herself as Linda, HOA VP. I explained Henry's condition, how Sarah's VY sit was urgent. Linda cut me off, saying Sarah didn't file the form, and rules were rules. I pushed back: cancer doesn't wait for paperwork. Her tone turned icy. She said if she bent the rules for a nurse, she'd have to do it for every pizza guy or plumber. My jaw clenched. This wasn't about pizza. This was life or death. Then she dropped the bomb: either file the form and wait 3 days or pay a $400. Same-day emergency entry fee. 4. Administrative costs. I nearly choked. Extortion, plain and simple. Sarah said she didn't have that kind of cash, and I told Linda I'd handle it, but I wanted to see these so-called rules. She snapped that they were on the HOA website or at the office, then hung up. I told Sarah to hang tight, promising I'd sort it out. Henry could barely eat from the chemos, told didn't need this stress. Driving to the HOA office, I wondered if this was bigger than one bad call. A $400 fee for a nurse felt like a shakedown, and I wanted answers. The office was a tidy building with a fancy garden out front. A receptionist eyed me warily when I asked for Linda. Minutes later, a woman in her late 40s strutted out, name tag reading, Linda, Vice President. She sized me up with a fake smile, gesturing to a table like we were discussing a fence dispute, not my uncle's Sir VY Val. I kept my job under wraps, introducing myself as just Tom. Linda launched into a spiel about Willow Creek's VY cider issues, contractors causing trouble, so the board cracked down, including on nurses. I said I got the need for security, but blocking urgent care was cruel. She didn't blink, repeating that Henry should have filed the form. I pointed out cancer's unpredictability. She shrugged, saying residents should plan better. My temper flared. Then I asked about the $400 fee. She confirmed it, claiming it covered processing and security. I pressed if it went to a medical fund or just the HOA's pocket. Her face tightened. She said it was for operations, but I smelled greed. I called her out, saying it felt like extorting sick people. She scoffed, accusing me of exaggerating, and gave me 2 choices: pay up or reschedule Sarah for 3 days later. I forced a smile, said I'd pay to get Sarah in now, but this wasn't over. Linda smirked, thinking she'd won. I grabbed DULA 400 from an ATM, handed it to her at the gate, and she signed a same-day access permit with a flourish. Sarah drove through, gave Henry his meds, and noted he'd lost too much weight. She recommended a dietitian, all while I stood there, fury simmering but relieved he was cared for. After, Sarah said she'd never seen an HOA charge like this, maybe a parking pass, but DULA 400 was insane. Once Henry dozed off, I dug into Willow Creek's website. Sure enough, new bylaws from a few months back outlined the VY cider policy, with no medical exemptions and vague, expedited fees. That stank of trouble. HOAs have power, but they can't trump laws protecting patients. I checked state regs, finding some that bar HOAs from blocking essential ser VYCS. This could be a legal minefield for Linda. Over the next few days, I juggled my cases with research. Online forums showed residents does not equal residents griping about Linda's fees for groceries, therapists, even oxygen deliveries. One guy said his mom's therapist got turned away for not booking 3 days ahead. Another paid DULA 200 for an early oxygen tank. Linda was running a racket, treating every VY cider like a cash machine. HOA budgets online showed a spike in miscellaneous fees since Linda's election, but community upgrades didn't match. Where was the money going? When Sarah planned another VY sit, I called Linda, asking for a waiver for Henry's nurse. She was curt, saying no waivers existed, pay or wait. I mentioned his fragile health. She suggested he move to a hospital if he couldn't follow rules. That lit a fuse. This wasn't just about Henry anymore. I called a real estate lawyer buddy, who said HOAs can't legally block medical care or charge fees that limit access. Lawsuits or county intervention could stop this. For now, I told Sarah to file the form to play by their rules while I built a case. On Sarah's next VY sit, I beat her to the gate, telling the guard she was expected. He called Linda, who stormed over, glaring at me. She refused Sarah entry without another DULA 400. I warned I'd contact authorities. Linda smirked, saying her rules were bulletproof. Big mistake. I leaned in, voice low, and said I was a federal prosecutor. If she kept extorting people, she'd regret it. Her eyes widened, but she doubled down, claiming her rules were legit. Still, she let Sarah through, maybe sensing I wasn't bluffing. Sarah adjusted Henry's chemo, crucial after bad blood tests. Without her, he could have tanked. I headed to the county housing office, meeting an official named Greg. He said they'd had complaints about Willow Creek but nothing this blatant. County rules required HOAs to allow medical access, and fees blocking it could be illegal. He urged me to file a complaint with Ivuwai Denke. I spent nights compiling bylaws, Sarah's statement, resident testimonies, and legal references. My lawyer friend said we had a shot at fines or an injunction. I also noticed the HOAs. VY cider ser VYCS revenue was sky high, with little spent on community fixes. If Linda was skimming, this could be fraud. Greg set up a mediation with the HOA. I went with Sarah, Leah VYing Henry to rest. Linda sat there, tossing me a sour look. Greg said complaints piled up about medical access. Linda insisted her rules were legal, just VY cider control. Sarah detailed how fees delayed care. I showed the bylaws' lack of medical exemptions and the DULA 400 I paid. Linda squirmed when I mentioned my job. Greg pushed for a medical exemption. Linda dodged, saying a committee would re-VYEW it. Greg wasn't buying it, scheduling a hearing if the HOA didn't budge. Residents started sharing horror stories: hospice nurses blocked, meds delayed, Linda threatening fines for complaints. At the county hearing, a packed room heard Greg outline the issue. Linda's lawyer argued the HOA's right to regulate VY ciders, but Greg countered that medical needs trumped that. I presented Henry's case and others. Sarah and residents backed me up. I dropped the financial bomb: VY cider fees soaring, community spending flat. A commissioner grilled Linda on where the money went. She mumbled about maintenance, but budgets showed otherwise. The room went quiet. The commissioners gave the HOA 30 days to fix the bylaws, exempt medical visits, and show transparent finances, or face penalties. Linda fumed, her lawyer promising cooperation. Outside, she cornered me, accusing me of meddling and threatening a defamation suit. I handed her my card, saying I'd see her in court if she tried. She backed off, knowing fraud allegations loomed larger. Days later, the HOA sent letters exempting medical workers from fees, signed by Linda. But the county pushed for a full financial audit. Rumors swirled that Linda's days were numbered. Residents reported smooth nurse visits, and Henry's health stabilized. The audit hit like a thunderbolt, thousands in fees unaccounted for, never reaching maintenance. Furious residents demanded refunds and lawsuits. Linda resigned, citing stress, but everyone knew she was running from the truth. A new board took over, refunding fees, revising bylaws, and starting a wellness fund. Henry got a personal apology. The community felt alive again, with Lucy, a neighbor, leading transparency efforts. Linda's house went up for sale. Some said she fled the state. Henry's chemo worked better, and we planned a fishing trip when he got stronger. Willow Creek became a model for humane HOA policies, all because a greedy tyrant picked the wrong fight. Linda thought she ruled the gates, but she didn't count on a prosecutor who'd tear her kingdom down.